Alright, hey again. In this tutorial I'm going to be showing you how to create a new project in NetBeans, and then I'm going to teach you some of the basics of Java programming. So let's get started. The first thing you want to do is hold down Control-Alt-T, and that will launch a terminal. Then if you do an ls, you should see NetBeans if you followed the last tutorial. If you didn't, then just launch NetBeans wherever your NetBeans is. So do a CD into NetBeans. If you hit tab, it will auto-complete it. Then do a CD into bin, and then do an ls to list all the files. And you'll see that this NetBeans file is here. So just to run NetBeans, type ./NetBeans space ampersand, and the space ampersand is there to allow us to run it, and then if we want to close this, then we can close it and it won't actually kill NetBeans. If you don't include this and you run it this way, then NetBeans will close if you ever close this terminal. So it's a useful thing to do if you run programs from the terminal like I do. So hit enter, and that should launch NetBeans. There we go. So this is the NetBeans IDE, and you'll notice when you open it up, you'll have this start page here, and if you click on this Learn and Discover tab, there's a section in here for demos and tutorials as well. So if you want extra material to learn, you can always go there and learn how to use NetBeans that way. Now, first thing we're going to do is create a new project. So go to File, New Project, and you want to select Java and then Java Application. So that's selected by default. I'm just going to click Next. And then up here, I'm going to type my first program. And all this stuff is fine here. This is just saying this is where it will store your projects, and this is where it's going to store this particular project at. In home, then your username, NetBeans projects, and then whatever this name is you put up here, my first program. So click finish. Alright, so this is NetBeans, and you have a few views here. There's actually a lot of views in NetBeans, but the main views you'll be using are these three right here. So this is your project view. This will list all your projects. If you had more than one, you would see a whole bunch of these, or however many projects you have with these little coffee cups beside them. This is the files that are in your project. So you have a package called My First Program, and then in that package you have a file called myfirstprogram.java, which is what we're looking at here. This is, if you open that file in a text editor, this is what you would see. This view here gives you sort of a summary of what is actually in the file that you're currently viewing in this editor view. And then this editor view is where you're going to actually be writing your code. So this is the view we're going to be focusing on for most of the tutorials, so I'm just going to move this over, get it out of the way kinda, and we'll start. Alright, very first thing in this file that you'll notice is this thing. So what the heck is this? Well, Java allows you to put in comments, and most programming languages allow the same kind of functionality. C++, C#, Objective-C, C, all let you do the same thing using the exact same characters and everything. So to do comments that are on multiple lines, you do this /star, and you don't actually have to put a star on each line. That's just for doing Java doc, which I'll explain later in another tutorial. But so if you wanted to just put a multi-line comment, you could say this is a multi-line comment. Okay, so you can use that to document your code and remind yourself of what some piece of code does. That's the main use for this. Secondarily, you can do a one-line comment using 2 forward slashes like this. And then, so you can say this is a one-line comment. Alright, now this line here declares the package that your file, your code file is in. So if you remember in this view, here's your file, which should have the same name as this, class.java. And it is in that package, my first program. So you have to declare the package before anything else. So there it is. Now, what does this line here do? Public class, my first program, bracket. This defines the name of your class. Now, what exactly a class is, I'll get to in a second. But in every program you write, you will have at least one class. And in at least one class, and usually only one class, you will have this method, which is exactly like this. It will say public static void main string bracket bracket args. And the string args is in parentheses, and then bracket, and then bracket. Curly braces I mean. And then it ends with another bracket to match this one up here. So you don't need to worry about exactly what this means yet. I will get to that. But just know that you will always have one class, and you always need this method in one class. Alright, so what we're going to do is we're actually going to create a new class. So go up here to my first program, this package, right click it, go to new, and then go to Java class. Then give this a name. We're going to call this person, and then click finish. Alright, so this is going to be the person class. Notice that it also has the package declared here, because that's the package that it's in. And then it has these 3 lines. Really just 2 lines with some space in between it. Public class person. So this is saying, public is saying this class is accessible from any other class that is in this package, or any class that imports it from another package. And we'll get to importing later as well. But it just means that this class can be used by other classes. Class is just a keyword saying, hey, that's what this is. This is a class. Person is the name of your class, and then you always need 2 curly braces. And then you'll put the contents of the class inside that. So, first thing I want to explain is what a class is. A class holds information about some object. It stores information, but more accurately, it's like a blueprint. So for a house, you can think of a house has a certain number of rooms. So a house class might say, here's how many rooms the house has. Here's how many windows the house has. Stuff like that. Well, in this particular case, a person class can hold something like a first name and a last name and an age and a date of birth and all those kinds of things. So it's basically, that's the best way to describe it, I think, is it's a blueprint that stores data about something or defines what kind of data makes something more accurately. It doesn't actually store it necessarily, but it defines what data types something has. And you'll start to understand this as you program more and more. It's difficult to wrap your head around at first. So, as I said, in person, what if we want to be able to store a name? What we need is a variable to hold that type of information. So I'm going to type string that starts with an uppercase S, first name, semicolon. Every line of code in Java that you write will end with a semicolon if it's completing a code statement. Every code statement must end with a semicolon. And then I'm going to put a word in front of this. The word is private. So that means, because I made it private, that this class, my first program class, cannot access this first name variable in the person. And that is that's a standard way of doing things, excuse me, so that other programmers don't do something that causes your program problems if they start working on it, and it prevents you from doing bad things with your data. So it's just a good practice to put private on your variables in your classes. There are some exceptions. I'll cover those in future tutorials. So what is a string? A string holds information like a name or any type of textual information. It can consist of numbers like A through Z, letters like A through Z, not numbers, or numbers like 0 through 100, or symbols like star and percent and question mark, or any combination of any of those. So a string, to actually define what the value of the string is, you can say space equals and then put quotes, and then the quotes, what's inside that will be the value of the string. So I'm going to say Aaron is the first name by default, and then I'm going to declare a last name also. So private, actually no, I won't put a last name. We'll just leave it at first name for now. So that's one data type, one of the lowest level data types in Java. There are some others, so I'm going to list those out here. An integer is a whole number, like 1, 2, 3, -1, negative 237, 0, etc. A float is a decimal number like 2.314, 1.7, etc. A long is exactly like an integer, but it can hold a larger value. And a double is the same way as a long is for an integer. It just holds larger values than a float does. And then the next type is a boolean. Actually, let's do a byte first. A byte is a number between 0 and 255 inclusive. An 8-bit number. And if you don't know a lot about bits and bytes, don't worry about it. It'll be covered in the future. You don't have to know that right now. And the final type that I'm going to disclose at this point in time is a boolean, is a variable that has a value of true or false. Okay. So let's say we want to create an integer. We would just say private int, and then I'm going to give the person class an age. So this is like a blueprint, remember. So I can say age, semicolon. And now there is a variable called age. So anytime I want to create a person in code, that person can be given an age and a first name. It doesn't have to be Aaron, and the age doesn't have to be, you know, whatever I set it to in here if I decided to set it. But I don't even have to set it in here if I don't want to. So I'm going to leave it. A float can be like weight. So private float weight equals 187.65, we'll say. And then to do a float, you need to type F at the end. Next up is a long. It's just like an integer, it just holds larger values. So we're going to say that a person has an ID. And to do that, type private space long space ID. A double is like a float, but it can hold larger values. And I'm going to go ahead and set the ID to a default value. I'm just going to put some real long number in here. And then to create a long, you have to include an L at the end of the number. To create a double, type private double. And then this is just going to be, I don't know, how about height. And yeah, it's kind of a weird format, but whatever. I'm just using this as an example. We don't really care about their height for what we're going to do anyway. But notice you don't have to put a D or anything. I'll go ahead and put in a value for that too, I guess. And you don't have to put an I for an integer. It's just floats and longs bytes, actually, you don't have to put anything for bytes either. It's just floats and longs. I couldn't actually remember. Seems like there is something, but maybe not. Alright, and then for booleans, this would be like, are they a male or female? So I'm going to say, is male equals true by default. So we have a first name, an age, a weight, ID, a height, some code, and whether the person is a male or not. But all these things are private, so nothing can use them. So the next thing I'm going to go over is, what is a constructor? How do you actually use this person? How do you create a person that you can actually do something with in code? This is just the blueprint. These values don't really mean anything to us if we can't do anything with them, and we likely want to have different values for every person that we create. So to do that, in Java there's something called a constructor, and in most object-oriented programming languages, which Java is object-oriented programming, it's based around objects, you can do something like the following. Person space person A equals new person, semicolon. New person, parentheses, semicolon. So what does this do? This says, use the class person to create a new person with the name person A. Now that's not their first name, that's just the name of a variable which is used to store this person that you're creating. And this is called a constructor. Every object that you create in Java, this is creating an object, has a default, every class has a default constructor to create an object for that class. But normally what you want to do, or a lot of times, you want your own constructor. So we're going to say public person, parentheses, curly brace, and hit enter, and it will put a closing curly brace there for you. And then we're going to put in some parameters for this so that we can create a person and define their name and age and other things when we create them here. So in here, type string. Remember, that's just textual information. Type string name, comma, int space age. And if I save this, you'll notice this has a red underline underneath it. That's because there's an error. I can no longer create a person using this constructor because I just created a constructor which is not like that. It actually takes parameters. You have to give it certain information for it to create a person object from this blueprint. So if I want this to work, I can either put the information it needs in here, or I can go ahead and define another constructor like that doesn't take parameters, and it will just create a person with these default values. So now if I go in here, I can create a second person, person B equals new person. And notice I can do that, but I want to make this person different. So I'm going to say Elena and 26. I have to put this in quotes because it's a string type. And this can just be a number. You could also do string name equals Elena, and then put name like that. And you can do the same thing with age. You can say int age equals 26, and then say age. So this will create a person whose name is Elena and whose age is 26. This one will create a person with the default values whose name is Aaron and whose age is 18. It's not true, but for the purposes of this example, I will make it true. Okay. So it won't actually change the name yet by doing this. It will still be the default. So what we have to do is define what happens with these values that are passed in. We have to set the values of these based on these. So to do that, we're going to say this, meaning this object, not the class as a whole, but the object that you created, dot first name equals name. So that will set the value of this variable to the value of this variable. Then you can say this dot age equals age. So that will set the value of this variable and this object to the value of this variable that was passed in here. Notice they have the same name. If I had just typed age, it wouldn't work. That's why I had to type this. For this one though, I can actually just type first name equals name, and it will work because the two variables are named differently. But it's good practice to put this whenever possible anyway. So I'm going to save that. Now that will create a person with the name Elena and the age of 26. So the last thing we're going to do is we want to actually display the information for each of these person objects that we're creating in here. So to do that, we're going to type system.out.println PRINTLN, prints a line to the console or the terminal, and then put quotes. This takes a string as an argument, and then in the quote say person A colon space quote plus concatenates whatever you put after the plus with whatever's before the plus. Concatenation is where you combine two strings, and since I put a string here, it will convert whatever I put here into a string. So I'm going to type person A. And then here I'm going to type system.out.println, and then in here put person B colon person B. Now if I run this, just right click and go to run file, you'll notice that it says person A, and then it says my first program dot person at blah 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 blah. That is a memory address for an object of that type right there. That's the package name, and that is the class name. So that's not very useful. That doesn't tell us what we want to know. So One thing about objects in Java, or classes in Java, is they are all derived from the object class. And in the object class, there are a few methods that every object inherits because they're children of that object. So one of these methods is the toString method. And we can override that in our own classes to do what we want to do rather than doing the default thing, which is doing this and returning a string with a memory address. So to do that, go to the person class and type public string toString parentheses and then curly braces. And then in here put return quote name colon space quote plus this dot first name plus age colon space quote plus this dot age semicolon. And remember, every time you create a code statement, it needs to end with a semicolon. So what does this do? Well, this is saying I have a public method, this method, this toString method. I want it to be accessible from other classes if they want to use it. It's going to return a variable of string type, so when anything that calls this will get a string back, and this return keyword says here's what I want to return. And in this case, it's creating a string by concatenating name colon space with the first name variable, string value, and then age, and then the age variable's value. And it creates one big string and sends that back. And then that gets concatenated with this and this. So go back to person and in there also put @override above that. That's saying you're overriding this. You don't have to do it, but that's a good practice. And then go back to my first program, right click it, and go to run file. And if you look in here, you'll see that it says name, person A, name Aaron, age 18, person B, name Elena, age 26. So that is our first program. It doesn't do much yet, but in the next couple tutorials, what we're actually going to do is we're going to develop an accounting program to allow us to actually store account information, bank account information for people who we create. So that's where this is going, and I'll see you in those tutorials. That's it for now. Bye.